Businessman Walter stepped onto the porch of his luxurious home to talk to the gardener about the wilted hydrangeas, but suddenly his wife's sharp, almost shrill tone of voice made him stop on the top step. Below, against the backdrop of a perfectly manicured lawn, an unpleasant scene was unfolding, disturbing the morning silence. Beatrice, dressed in an elegant blue dress, was gesticulating furiously at a young maid who was trembling under the onslaught. Isabella stood silently with her head bowed, the black bin bag clutched in her hand, serving as her only support in this situation. Simon, their son, sat at a table on the terrace, watching the events unfold with an impassive expression, showing no desire to intervene. "Where did you hide it, you thief?" Beatrice whispered, pointing her finger directly at the girl's face. "I didn't take anything, madam," Isabella replied timidly, without looking up at her. Descending the steps, Walter suddenly appeared in front of Beatrice, causing her to fall silent for a moment. However, her face reflected nothing but a bleak premonition. He glanced at the humiliated girl, then at his angry wife, and his subsequent actions came as a complete surprise to everyone. For several weeks, serious hostility had been brewing on the mansion's perfect lawn. Beatrice, the mistress of the house, whose health had been increasingly unstable lately, found new reasons every day to pick on the quiet maid, Isabella. Not long ago, she had made a scene over what she considered to be a poorly ironed tablecloth, and the day before, she had accused the girl of unethically listening in on her phone conversations. The disappearance of the family brooch was the culmination of the growing hostility, the final push towards irrational anger. Isabella, a young girl forced to leave school due to family circumstances, patiently endured all the insults, diligently fading into the background. She only wanted to do her duty honestly, unaware that she had become a pawn in a game whose motives lay much deeper than the mistress's simple dislike of her servant. Walter slowly approached his wife and, with tenderness but firm determination, lowered her hand, which was still pointed at Isabella. Beatrice turned to him, her face contorted into a grimace of obvious discontent. She had clearly expected immediate and unconditional support.
"Walter, finally!" she hissed. "This girl stole my family brooch, an heirloom from your mother. Call the police immediately and throw her out."
Walter did not even glance in her direction. His attention was fixed on the maid, who was frozen with fear, unable to move. He slowly approached her. "Isabella, please accept my apologies for my wife's behavior," he said in a calm and confident voice that left no room for doubt. "Please consider today a day off. It will be paid in full. You may go home." His words echoed in the deafening silence like a clap of thunder. Isabella, her eyes full of amazement and disbelief, looked up at him. Beatrice, her mouth half open as if she couldn't believe her ears, froze in place. Even Simon, sitting on the terrace, showed keen interest for the first time, leaning forward slightly. "What?" Beatrice cried out, coming to her senses. "You're apologizing to her. You're letting her go. Walter, have you lost your mind? She robbed me." "We don't know that," Walter replied calmly, finally turning to his wife. "We have no grounds for accusation yet." "I don't need any grounds. I know everything," she shouted, finally losing her composure. "That brooch was in my jewelry box last night, and this morning, after she cleaned up, it was gone." Walter withstood her furious gaze, then glanced at the front entrance, the lawn, and turned his gaze back to his wife. "To put an end to these senseless scandals once and for all, I will hire a private detective," he declared, every sound of his voice firm and decisive. "He will thoroughly search the house and find your brooch, Beatrice, and until that happens, I forbid you to even appear near Isabella." This blow was devastating to Beatrice's authority. Anger colored her face crimson. Unable to utter a single word, she turned, and, her heels clicking on the steps, headed for the house, slamming the door with such force that its echo reverberated throughout the room. Isabella, still in disbelief, whispered a quiet "thank you," and, bowing her head awkwardly, almost ran away, clutching the rubbish bag tightly in her hand. Walter remained on the porch, watching her until she disappeared from view. The next morning, Isabella came to work with a heavy heart, sensing that yesterday's storm, which had subsided under the pressure of her employer's intervention, might flare up again with renewed intensity. A tense silence reigned in the huge house. The air seemed electrified and cold, every sound echoing hollowly. Passing through the hall, Isabella saw Beatrice sitting in the living room with a magazine, but the maid clearly felt her cold, contemptuous gaze, full of obvious disapproval. The mistress was silent, and that silence was frighteningly powerful, much more oppressive than any open display of anger. In the kitchen, she was met by the elderly cook Maria, whose wrinkled face expressed deep sympathy. "Hang in there, girl," Maria whispered, handing Isabella a cup of hot tea. "The mistress is in a bad mood today, worse than any storm. She walks around the house in silence, but her gaze is like lightning." "Thank you, Maria," Isabella replied quietly, warming her cold hands on the warm ceramic. "I don't know what will happen next. Mr. Walter defended me, but it seems he only made the situation worse." "Men come and go, but we women have to stay here," Maria said regretfully, returning to the stove. "Just do your duty and try not to attract her attention." The advice was useful, but impossible to follow. Less than half an hour later, Beatrice found Isabella in the dining room. She did not raise her voice. Her tone was deliberately calm and detached, which made her words particularly sharp and sarcastic. "Since you're still here, get to work," she croaked. "The family silver, which hasn't been cleaned in a long time, is stored in the far cupboard. I want every piece to shine like it's brand new by dinner time. And don't forget, no special cleaning products, just baking soda and a cloth so you don't ruin anything." Isabella nodded silently, realizing that this was not just a task, but a subtle form of punishment. The work was hard, requiring painstaking and endless effort. She spent hours scrubbing the tarnished forks, spoons and candlesticks, feeling her back ache and her fingers go numb. At noon, the doorbell rang, and a stern-faced man dressed in a strict grey suit entered the house. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrison and said he was a private detective hired by Walter. The owner of the house came down himself to greet the guest and told Isabella and Maria to go to the living room. Beatrice, her face carved from stone, joined them last. "This is Mr. Harrison. He will be investigating the case of the missing brooch," Walter said, maintaining a formal tone. "I ask everyone to be as helpful as possible." The detective looked carefully at everyone present, pausing briefly on Isabella. "I will be asking each of you a few questions and inspecting some rooms, including Mrs. Beatrice's bedroom," the detective said, in an even, emotionless voice. "Let's start with the lady of the house." "Without any warmth," Beatrice replied, standing up. "I'll show you where the thief could have hidden the stolen goods. I'm sure you'll find them among the maid's belongings." "Please allow me to determine the methods and order of the investigation myself," the detective replied politely but firmly. "I prefer to work based on facts, not speculation." His words silenced Beatrice like a bolt of lightning, but her cheeks flushed with a faint blush. For the next few hours, Mr. Harrison worked methodically in the master bedroom, examining every wardrobe, chest of drawers, and the contents of every box. Beatrice tirelessly accompanied him, trying to comment on his every move, until Walter, unable to bear it any longer, asked her to leave the detective alone. Late in the evening, Harrison came downstairs and asked Isabella to give him a few minutes for a conversation. At the kitchen table, he asked her a few clarifying questions about her behavior the previous day, carefully writing down her answers in a notebook. His voice was calm, without a hint of accusation or pressure, but his intense gaze made the girl feel uncomfortable. The day ended without result. The brooch was not found. Isabella left the house feeling devastated and broken. The hostess's icy silence, the humiliating tasks, and the detective's interrogation had pushed her to her limit. She understood that this was only the first step, and that the atmosphere of tension in this luxurious house would only grow stronger. 2 days flew by unnoticed. Mr. Harrison continued his visits, his quiet presence becoming an integral part of the oppressive domestic routine. He questioned the gardener, the driver, and even Maria, who, with a stony expression on her face, claimed she had seen and heard nothing. The brooch had disappeared without a trace. Isabella tried to blend into the walls of the house, moving like a shadow, performing her duties quickly and quietly. She cleaned the empty rooms and tried to eat lunch alone in the kitchen. After lunch, she went upstairs to the library to dust the many bookshelves. It was one of the few corners of the house where she could find peace. The smell of old books and leather calmed her, and the silence, broken only occasionally by the creaking of the parquet floor, created a feeling of seclusion. As she was carefully dusting a heavy leather-bound folio, the library door opened silently, and Simon appeared in the doorway. Isabella started in surprise, nearly dropping the book. The anxious young man, as if mirroring her own feelings, quickly closed the door behind him and stood uncertainly in the center of the room, not knowing how to begin. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you," he said timidly, not daring to meet her gaze. His eyes slid over the spines of the books. "It's all right, Mr. Simon," Isabella said calmly, putting the volume back in its place. She anticipated that he was about to give her another assignment from his mother. But he remained silent, and an awkward silence lingered. Simon shifted nervously from foot to foot, put his hands in his pockets, then took them out again, as if trying to find the right words. Finally, summoning all his courage, he looked at her.
I wanted to apologize, he said with difficulty.
"For Mum, for all of this. Everything that's happening just isn't right." Isabella froze, clutching the duster tightly in her hand. Her eyes showed genuine surprise. In all the time he had worked in this house, Simon had never spoken a word to her, always remaining a silent and taciturn observer. "No need to apologize," she said softly. "For what?" He shook his head, a note of bitter sadness in his voice. "I stand and watch as she lashes out at you. I should have intervened, but I always keep quiet." He walked over to the window and stood still, looking at the garden, his silhouette contrasting sharply against the bright sunny day. "She wasn't always like this," he said quietly, as if talking to himself. "Or maybe I just didn't see it before. After my father became really rich, she seemed to change. She became fragile, but at the same time, angry." "I'm so sorry," whispered Isabella, unable to think of anything more appropriate to say. Simon turned abruptly, his face pierced with a serious and focused expression. He approached her. "I didn't just come to apologize. I wanted to explain something to you about the brooch. I'm sure you didn't touch it." "I didn't take it," Isabella replied firmly. "I know, but it's my mother. When she gets very upset or anxious, she has a strange habit of hiding valuable things in the most unexpected places, and then she completely forgets where she put them." He spoke quietly, almost in a whisper, as if he was afraid they might be overheard. Isabella held her breath, trying to catch every word and understand its meaning. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Remember a couple of years ago when we had a dinner party, and she was very nervous?" Simon reminded her. "The next day she made a fuss, claiming that her favorite earrings had disappeared. My father was ready to fire the entire staff, but a month later I accidentally found them in a tea caddy hidden in the kitchen cupboard. She had put them there herself and forgotten, without even realizing it. The revelation hung in the air, turning everything upside down. It wasn't just a guess, it was a real clue that could solve all the mysteries and save her. "Do you think the same thing happened with the brooch?" Isabella asked hopefully. "I have almost no doubt about it," Simon agreed. "Yesterday, she had an unpleasant phone conversation with someone from her charity circle. She was very tense. Can you think of anything unusual about her behavior? Or did she visit any places she doesn't usually go to?" I can't say for sure," Isabella replied with difficulty, trying to remember the events of that day. "I was just doing my job," Simon exhaled. "All right, just keep that in mind. I can't tell my father or the detective about this. They won't take it seriously. They'll say I'm protecting you or something like that, or that I'm making my mother out to be crazy. But you are now aware of this. Perhaps it will be useful to you. The silence of the library was filled once more with the ticking of the old clock when he fell silent.
Thank you, Isabella replied with sincere warmth. Her voice trembled slightly with emotional relief. Thank you, Simon.
He just nodded briefly, avoiding her gaze again.
I have to go. And he was already rushing to the door. Please don't tell anyone that we talked.
The door slammed behind him and Isabella was left alone. She sat down on a chair, and the tears running down her cheeks were not tears of despair, but rather of gratitude and renewed hope. For the first time in these difficult days, she felt that her misfortune was not being ignored, that she was not alone in her struggle. The conversation with Simon had turned Isabella's inner world upside down. The icy fear that had gripped her heart since morning had eased a little, giving way to a new, previously untried feeling, heightened alertness. Now, as she carried out her duties, she did not simply perform routine actions automatically, but looked closely at everything around her, subconsciously searching for something unusual, something that disrupted the usual order. Details that had previously gone unnoticed caught her eye. The landlady's silk scarf, forgotten on the windowsill, a vase in the living room that had been unexpectedly moved, a half-finished cup of cold coffee left in the winter garden. Now, each of these little things looked to her like a potential clue, a fragment of a great mystery, the solution to which would determine her future. Thursday was her scheduled cleaning day in Walter's office. This room always evoked conflicting emotions in her, a mixture of awe and anxiety. The huge, dark wood desk, the bookcases reaching up to the ceiling, the heavy velvet curtains and the smell of expensive tobacco smoke and leather created an aura of authority and severity. Isabella usually tried to finish cleaning here as quickly as possible, afraid of disturbing the invisible order established by the owner. But today, everything was different. Opening the door to the study, she first glanced around attentively. On the desk, despite its perfect order, lay neatly arranged business papers, creating the impression of controlled chaos. Walter had apparently worked late, as several stacks of documents were scattered around the corners, and in the center of the desk lay an open folder with one of the pages. Isabella set to work, trying not to make too much noise. She carefully dusted the shelves, wiped the glass cabinet doors, and began polishing the desk. The girl was especially careful, walking around the stacks of papers so as not to move them. At the end of her work, her gaze accidentally caught on the open document lying in the center of the desk. It was written in 2 languages in parallel columns. One was in English and the other in Portuguese, a language Isabella knew almost perfectly, as it had been her main interest at university, her passion, the world from which life had so cruelly torn her away. Reluctantly, she scanned a few lines of the Portuguese text. It was a legal contract full of specific terms, and she was about to look away when she stumbled upon a phrase that made her pause. The English version of the contract referred to a one-time penalty payment of 10%, while the Portuguese version referred to a payment that could be interpreted as annual. The difference between the two was enormous. This was not just a typo but a serious mistake that could radically affect the financial obligations of the deal and lead to significant financial losses for Walter's company. Isabella's heart began to race. She glanced around, afraid that someone might unexpectedly enter and see her studying her hostess's documents. The office was silent. Isabella leaned over the table again, rereading the ill-fated paragraph, trying to find the mistake. But her fears were confirmed. The translation was distorted, and the consequences of this inaccuracy threatened to be catastrophic. A real internal struggle raged in her soul. Another part of her desperately cried out that she had to act, immediately leave the table, pretend she hadn't seen anything, and forget about the incident. After all, she was just a maid accused of theft. Who would believe her? Her attempt to intervene would be perceived as a bold intrusion into other people's affairs, and she would be dismissed immediately. This time, even her master's protection would not save her. But the other, stronger part of her, formed on the basis of honesty and a sense of responsibility, could not remain silent. In this terrible situation, only Mr. Walter showed her humanity. He believed her without question, protected her from his wife's anger, and gave her a chance to make amends. To leave things as they were would mean betraying his trust, allowing him to suffer enormous losses because of someone else's negligence. She hesitated for a long time, painfully weighing all the possible consequences. The danger was enormous, but her sense of responsibility was unbearably strong. Deciding to act, she realized that she had to proceed with subtlety and caution. She couldn't just go up to him and point out the mistake directly. That would be too presumptuous. Isabella looked around the table for a clean sheet of paper. Seeing a small notepad, she picked up a pen and, remembering the calligraphy she had studied at university, wrote a few lines, phrasing her thought not as a correction of a mistake, but as a polite question. "We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience caused. It may be worth double-checking the meaning of the term specified in Clause 7.3 of the Portuguese version of the contract, as its legal interpretation may differ significantly from the English version." She decided not to sign the letter. It was just an anonymous note. With a tremor in her heart, she placed the small piece of paper on the page with the error, covering it with another document so that it would not be immediately noticeable but would remain visible upon closer inspection. Having finished, she quickly tidied up and left the office, closing the door behind her with her heart pounding and her throat dry. She had done what she thought was necessary, and now all she had to do was wait for the reaction and hope that her bold and risky decision would not bring her new troubles. The day passed in anxious anticipation, shrouded in a fog of doubt. Isabella performed her duties mechanically, the same thoughts spinning around in her head. Every time a door opened, she jumped nervously, and every loud voice sent a chill through her stomach. She expected anything, from angry accusations to immediate dismissal, from scandal to silent condemnation. But nothing happened. Walter had left for the office before she woke up, and Beatrice seemed not to notice her, which was the greatest relief for Isabella. By evening, when the atmosphere had reached a fever pitch, she had almost convinced herself that nothing had happened with the note. It had either not been found or had simply been thrown away without being given any importance. This thought brought her a strange relief, mixed with a hint of disappointment. Walter returned late, when Isabella was about to leave the house. He was tired, but there was a special gleam in his eyes. Passing through the hall, he gave her a quick but penetrating glance that caused the girl to feel strangely numb. Without saying a word, he simply headed for his study, and Isabella had already put on her coat when Maria appeared in the kitchen. "The master asks you to come to his office," the cook said, her voice normal, but her eyes betraying her anxiety. He said it's urgent. Isabella's heart sank. It was over. She slowly took off her coat, feeling her legs fill with a numbing heaviness. The walk down the corridor and up the stairs seemed to take forever. Each step echoed with a dull, lingering thud in her ears. She froze in front of the massive oak door, closing her eyes for a moment to gather her strength, and knocked softly. "Come in," Walter's calm voice sounded. She opened the door and entered the study. The man, the owner of the house, was standing by the window, gazing out at the dark garden, but a smile appeared on his face when he noticed her. He was still holding that same small piece of paper from the notebook in his hand. "Good evening, Isabella. Please, take a seat here." He gestured for her to sit in the leather armchair opposite his desk. His manner was surprisingly polite, almost formal. She sat awkwardly on the edge of the chair, folding her hands in her lap. Walter walked around the desk and sat down opposite her, placing the note on its shiny surface. "Did you write this?" he asked, without taking his eyes off her. There was no anger in his eyes, only serious, almost investigative curiosity. Isabella swallowed hard. Telling the truth was her only option. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, I had no right to touch your documents. "You saved my company from huge losses," Walter interrupted. His voice sounded calm, but there was a hint of genuine surprise in it. I spent the whole day in meetings with lawyers. The mistake you uncovered was catastrophic. Our in-house translator made a gross error, and no one on my team noticed. Not a single one. Only you. Isabella was silent, unable to utter a sound. Fear gradually gave way to all-consuming shock.
I want to understand how this happened, Walter continued, leaning forward. Where did you get such a deep knowledge of Portuguese? And not just conversational, but legal terminology as well.
There was now an unmistakable curiosity in his voice. For the first time, she felt that he was looking at her not just as part of the interior, but as an equal. And that gave her confidence. I studied at university, sir, she said with greater confidence. In the philology department. Portuguese was my major. I had to interrupt my studies for family reasons. Family reasons? He repeated gently, as if encouraging her to continue. Isabella told her story. She talked about her dream of becoming a translator, her mother's serious illness, how her plans had fallen apart, and how she had been forced to work as a maid. She spoke calmly, without despondency or tears, simply stating the bare facts of her life. Walter listened to her silently, without interrupting, his expression becoming increasingly serious and focused. After her story, a long-awaited silence fell in the office. I see, he said at last. Getting up, he walked back to the window. So, if it weren't for your mother's illness, you would have already finished your studies and would be looking for a job in your chosen profession. Yes, she replied quietly. Thank you, Isabella, he said to her, his voice sounding sincerely respectful. You have done a great deal for me. I am indebted to you. You may leave. She stood up, her feelings still unable to comprehend what had happened. The conversation had left an indelible mark, turning her world upside down. Leaving the office, she felt that she had become a completely different person. Going down the stairs, she met Beatrice, who seemed to be waiting for her in the hall. The mistress's face showed a clear mixture of jealousy and suspicion. "What were you doing with my husband for so long?" she asked, her voice icy. "Mr. Walter asked me a few questions, madam," Isabella replied calmly, without looking away. "What questions?" Beatrice snorted contemptuously. "I have no doubt that you are pretending to be naive in order to win his favor. Don't count on it. I will still figure out your true intentions." Her words no longer hurt her. A transformation had taken place inside Isabella. She no longer felt like a defenseless victim. She understood that the master of the house now saw her not as a thief, but as a valuable specialist. And this realization filled her with strength. Without a word, she walked past the mistress and headed for the exit, leaving Beatrice alone in the hall, overcome with impotent rage. The new reality in the house did not appear instantly. It crept into everyday life gradually, unnoticed by most, but with subtle changes in Walter's behavior that were obvious to everyone, especially his wife Isabella. The next morning, as Isabella was setting the table for breakfast, Walter came downstairs earlier than usual. Seeing his wife, he paused and gave her a warm, previously unknown, smiling expression. "Good morning, Isabella. I wanted to express my gratitude to you once again for yesterday," he said, his voice loud enough for Beatrice, who was entering the room, to hear. "Your care is truly amazing." Beatrice froze in the doorway, her fingers clenching the back of the chair with force. Her gaze darted from her husband's beaming face to the embarrassed maid, and a thin, angry line appeared on her lips. "What kind of thoughtfulness are you talking about, dear?" she asked, sitting down at the table with icy politeness. "Has our maid mastered a new special way of arranging forks?" Walter sat down opposite her, his smile gone, replaced by a barely perceptible irritation. "It's insight and skill, Beatrice, qualities that have nothing to do with social position," he replied dryly, unfolding his napkin. "Isabella has been of considerable assistance to me in my professional affairs." He deliberately did not reveal all the details, and this mystery only intensified his wife's jealousy. For her, It was like confirmation that some kind of unacceptable hidden relationship had developed between her husband and the maid. Breakfast passed in an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the sounds of cutlery. Beatrice deliberately ignored Isabella but kept throwing sarcastic glances at her and her husband, filled with venom and suspicion. On the same day, another incident occurred that pushed Beatrice to the limit. When she saw Isabella in the living room watering the flowers, she immediately went on the offensive. "I'm fed up with this idleness," she said in a commanding voice. "There's a pile of old garden furniture in the backyard that needs to be taken to the shed. It's heavy, of course, but you're so strong and agile you can handle it yourself." It was completely humiliating. The work was exhausting and undignified, clearly not suitable for a young girl. Isabella nodded silently, resigning herself to her fate, but then Walter appeared in the living room. He noticed what was happening without finishing his phone call and interrupted it. "1 minute," he said into the phone, then turned to his wife. "Beatrice, what's going on?" "I'm assigning the task to the maid," she replied dryly, giving him a defiant look. "Now I have to get your permission for everything that happens in the house." "You don't need to ask permission to manage the house, but you'd better act wisely," Walter said calmly. "We have a gardener for heavy work. Isabella, please continue to take care of the flowers. I'll discuss the furniture with Thomas myself." He turned and walked away, continuing his phone conversation as if nothing had changed. However, for Beatrice, it was a humiliating public insult. Not only did her husband ignore her order, but he did so in front of the maid, completely destroying her authority. When Walter disappeared from view, Beatrice approached Isabella, her eyes burning with anger. "Are you satisfied?" she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "Have you achieved what you wanted? Have you charmed him with your fabrications about your poor life? Do you think I don't notice what's going on? You think you can replace me?" Isabella stepped back, stunned by this insane tirade. The accusation of theft was shocking, but the accusations of something more personal, more despicable, cut her to the core.
"Mom, you're wrong. I never—" "Shut up," Beatrice exclaimed. "I won't dare speak to you again. I'll find out everything and you'll regret ever setting foot in my house."
That evening, when Simon returned from university and Walter from work, the long-awaited and tense discussion took place. The tension that had been building up throughout the day was finally resolved. Walter found his wife in the bedroom, sitting in front of the mirror, nervously combing her hair. "We need to talk, Beatrice," he began, closing the door behind him without hesitation. "About what?" she asked, without looking up from her reflection in the mirror. "About how you humiliated me in front of the servants today." "I didn't humiliate you. I simply asked you to be more reasonable." He rubbed his nose wearily. "Your behavior is beyond the pale. You are becoming more and more obsessed with this girl, and it's becoming a problem." "Obsessed?" She spun around in her chair. "Are you saying I'm obsessed?" "And you're not? You, who showers her with compliments at breakfast, shields her from any responsibilities, and holds secret meetings with her in your office?" Rage trembled in her voice, barely contained. Walter looked at her and realized with pain that there was a gulf between them, separating them on different shores. "Beatrice, listen, this girl is incredibly smart and talented. She has been a great help to me in a difficult business matter, demonstrating knowledge that even my subordinates lack. My attitude towards her is one of utmost respect, based on recognition of her abilities." "Abilities?" She laughed sharply and unpleasantly. "I have no doubt about her talents. Manipulating men is also an art, and you, my dear husband, have fallen for her hook, line and sinker like an innocent child." "That's absurd," he barked, his voice growing increasingly irritated. "Do you realize what you're saying? You're jealous of me and a maid whom you yourself accused of theft. Maybe there was no theft?" She suddenly changed tactics. "Maybe you gave her the brooch yourself, and now you and the detective are playing this game to make me look like a crazy, hysterical woman?" The accusation was so absurd and implausible that Walter was momentarily stunned. He looked at his wife, at her face contorted with rage and jealousy, and did not recognize his soulmate. "You've crossed the line, Beatrice," he whispered, but there was firmness in his soft voice. "There's no more to say about this." The investigation will be completed. And until we find the brooch, I urge you not to disturb Isabella. That is my final order." He left the room, leaving her alone. Beatrice did not move, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She felt humiliated, treacherously surrounded by hostility. It was as if everyone was against her, her husband, the detective, even her own son, whose silence sounded like condemnation to her. And the culprit behind it all seemed to be that quiet, inconspicuous maid who had somehow managed to destroy her life. A desperate plan formed in her mind. If she couldn't prove Isabella's guilt, she would have to find evidence of her innocence herself, or perhaps even create it. Jealousy and a feeling of loss of control, like fire, fueled Beatrice's despair, pouring it into a cruel and disgusting plan. In the evening, after Walter left, she waited for Isabella to finish all her chores in the kitchen and go home, making sure that the house was completely silent and that even Maria had gone to her room. Beatrice made her way to the small corridor where the staff's personal lockers were kept. Her heart was pounding, filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation of what was to come. She opened her jewelry box and took out an elegant gold earring with a diamond. Although it was not the most expensive piece in her collection, it was recognizable and valuable enough to make its loss seem plausible. Choosing the earring over other jewelry, she decided that a single lost earring would be easier to pass off as an accident, while a pair would look too unnatural. With trembling hands, she opened the simple lock on Isabella's locker using a thin nail file. Inside were only a few simple things: a spare pair of shoes, a small thermos, a paperback book, and an old purse. Beatrice looked at the purse with disgust, but then dismissed the idea, deciding it was too obvious. She hid the jewelry in the pocket of an old knitted cardigan hanging on a hook. Perfect. No one would think that she could have left the jewelry in such an inconspicuous item. With a sense of accomplishment, she quietly closed the locker door and silently made her way to her part of the house. All that remained was to wait for dawn and play out the final act of her plan. Simon, who had become an accidental participant in his parents' evening quarrel, could not calm down. His father's words about Isabella's talent and intelligence, and at the same time his mother's insane accusations, finally made him make a decision. He could no longer remain silent and passive. The information he had given Isabella had not changed the situation, which meant that more decisive action was needed. He remembered his own story about the earrings found in the tea caddy. His mother, in a state of stress, had mechanically hidden things without realizing what she was doing. He tried to reconstruct the sequence of events. On the day the brooch disappeared, she had received an unpleasant phone call. What had happened to her after that? Simon left his room and did not go to his mother's bedroom, which had already been searched by the detective, but went to other, more hidden corners of the house. He thoroughly searched the pantry, looked in the boxes with dishes for different seasons, and examined the shelves in the guest rooms. His search was haphazard, relying more on intuition than rational thinking. Suddenly, he remembered that after their conversation, his mother had complained about the cool weather and talked about the need to get warm clothes. It was an unusual complaint for a warm autumn day, but it was precisely such inconsistencies that now seemed significant to him. In search of answers, he went to the attic, where a supply of winter clothes was stored in dusty cardboard boxes and covers. The air in the room was musty and permeated with the smell of mothballs. In the dim light of the lamp, he methodically unpacked the covers, examining coats and fur coats. A feeling of foolishness did not leave him as he rummaged through the pockets of old things, but some force compelled him to continue. In the third cover was a heavy tweed raincoat that Beatrice had worn last winter. Simon reached into the side pocket, and his fingers touched something hard and cold. With trepidation in his heart, he pulled the object out into the light. In the dim light of the lamp, the family sapphire brooch lay in his hand, glimmering faintly. It was intact. His assumption was confirmed. His mother had indeed hidden it, and to his surprise, forgotten where she had put it. In the morning, when Isabella arrived at the office, the first person she met was Beatrice, whose face was beaming with a triumphant smile.
"I think I have news for everyone," she announced, so that Walter, who was coming down the stairs, could hear her.
This morning I discovered that one of my gold earrings was missing, and I think I know where to find it. She headed straight for the staff lockers, followed by Walter and Simon, who had just entered the kitchen. Suddenly Isabella froze, overcome by the icy terror that had seized her once again. "I want everyone to see this," said Beatrice, approaching Isabella's locker, "so that there will be no further speculation that I staged anything." With ostentatious ease, she opened the door and, without a moment's hesitation, reached into the pocket of her old cardigan. In the next moment, a gold earring appeared from the pocket.
"Here it is," she exclaimed, triumphantly holding up the jewellery. "What do you have to say now, Walter? Are you going to continue to cover for this thief? We have irrefutable evidence." Walter's gaze shifted back and forth between the earring and Isabella's deathly pale face, his expression reflecting his confusion. He wanted to believe in the girl's innocence, but the evidence was too compelling.
Isabella, unable to utter a word, only cried bitterly, her face expressing complete despair.
"Mum, wait," Simon's quiet but determined voice rang out.
Everyone turned to him. He appeared in the doorway of the corridor, his face tense and serious. He slowly approached them, unclenching his fist, in whose palm lay the very brooch that had disappeared. "Is this what you've been looking for all this time?" he asked, without taking his eyes off his mother. Beatrice fell silent, as if she had been cut off. Her gaze shifted from the brooch to her son, and the colour slowly drained from her face. Where did you find it?" she whispered. "In the pocket of your old tweed coat in the attic," Simon said calmly. "You must have put it there a couple of weeks ago after your meeting with the charity committee and simply forgotten about it, just like you forgot about the earrings in the tea caddy 2 years ago." The hallway was deathly quiet. Each of Simon's words sounded like a clap of thunder shattering the carefully constructed lie. Beatrice looked at her son, and her eyes flashed with horror, not from the impending exposure, but from the realization that her vulnerability, her secret shame, was now open for all to see. The earring slipped from her weakened fingers and fell to the floor with a quiet but desperate clink. In the narrow corridor, the silence became so thick that it felt like a tangible substance. It pressed on their ears, absorbing all emotions, from triumph turned to dust, to despair that had unexpectedly found salvation, to the shock that paralyzed everyone involved in this drama. Beatrice stared at the brooch in Simon's hand as if she saw a ghost in it. Her face, only a second ago twisted into a malicious smile, now resembled a fragile porcelain mask on the verge of cracking. Her gaze slowly slid to her husband, searching his eyes for the slightest sign of support, but found only a cold, impassive void. Walter looked like a man whose darkest fears had just taken shape. He broke the general stupor by taking a decisive step forward. Without uttering a sound, he took the brooch from Simon and examined it closely, as if comparing it to some internal image. Then his gaze fell on the gold earring lying alone on the floor. His hand did not move to pick it up. "Isabella," his voice was unexpectedly calm and tired. "On behalf of our entire family, I offer you our most sincere apologies for this absurdity. Your innocence has been fully established." With her cheeks wet with tears, Isabella could only nod. Her heart was filled with expectations of words of comfort, perhaps even joy, but what Walter said next shook her deeply. "Your work here is done," he continued in the same businesslike tone. "Please contact my assistant tomorrow morning. I will provide you with his contact details. He will arrange all the necessary procedures and transfer compensation equal to your annual salary to your account as compensation for moral damages." It was like a punch in the gut. The dismissal was justified, but it still felt like a betrayal. She realized that she was just a pawn in their complicated family game, a piece that was thrown off the board when the game was over. All her newfound confidence, all the respect she thought she deserved, vanished in an instant. She was once again just a servant they were trying to get rid of by paying her money to forget she ever existed.
"But, Dad," Simon began, but Walter stopped him abruptly before he could finish.
Isabella did not argue, preferring to remain silent. She turned, took her few belongings from her locker, and, without looking at anyone, left the house that had become her personal hell over the past 7 days. She walked out with her head held high, but inside she was burning with the pain of what she had gone through. After Isabella closed the door behind her, Walter turned to his wife and son. "Beatrice, Simon, please follow me to my study, immediately." His tone brooked no argument. Closing the study door, he pointed his wife to a chair and remained standing by the wall with his arms crossed. Walter placed the brooch on the table, and it glinted in the light of the desk lamp, as if drawing everyone's attention. "I demand an explanation," Walter said, staring at his wife. "What explanation do you need?" Beatrice boiled over, her voice breaking into a scream. "You saw everything. Your son, your own son, betrayed me for that. That girl, he humiliated me, made me a laughing stock." "Mum, I didn't betray you," Simon said calmly but clearly. "I just told the truth. You couldn't remember where the brooch was, so you decided to accuse her with impunity. And when that didn't work, you planted the earring on her. Am I right?" Beatrice jumped up, her face contorted with anger.
"How dare you? You have no right to judge me. I am your mother." "Enough," Walter exclaimed, his voice sharp and commanding. "Sit down, Beatrice."
Shuddering, she slowly sank back into her chair, hiding from his cold gaze. He paused, allowing the silence to work, and then, without breaking eye contact, sat down at the table opposite her. "None of that matters anymore. Not the brooch, not the earrings, not your attempts to drag Isabella into this," he said, his voice taking on new, disturbing tones. "These are just symptoms of an illness you still refuse to acknowledge." Beatrice looked at him, confused. Simon tensed, realizing that their conversation was taking an unexpected and unpredictable turn. "What are you talking about? What illness are you referring to?" Beatrice asked quietly. "I'm talking about your increasingly frequent headaches," Walter began, clenching his fingers. "About your increasingly frequent forgetfulness. Don't you think I notice you miss appointments, forget birthdays, can't remember what you said just 5 minutes ago? And you hide things, not just jewelry, but keys, glasses, important letters. You hide them and then make a scene as if they've been stolen." "No, that's not true," she replied, her voice trembling. "I'm just very tired." "No, Beatrice?" Walter opened the desk drawer and took out a thin folder with an official form. He handed it to his wife. "Last Wednesday, I spoke to Dr. Evans and asked him to conduct a full examination. Here are the results," he said, pointing to the folder. "From the magnetic resonance imaging." Simon approached the table, trying to read the text of the document. Beatrice regarded the folder as if it were a deadly snake. "I don't understand. What examination are you talking about?" "I haven't been anywhere." "They told you it was just a routine checkup, so you wouldn't worry," Walter said gently. There was a note of sympathy in his voice, as if it concealed an old, deep sadness. "Darling, the doctors are very concerned. Your absent-mindedness, mood swings, outbursts of anger, suspiciousness, these aren't just personality traits, they're warning signs." He opened the folder and found a photograph and a report full of medical terms inside. "What is this?" Beatrice whispered, her lips trembling. "It's—" Walter swallowed hard, finding it difficult to speak. "It's early-stage dementia, a very rare and rapidly progressing form for your age group, but unfortunately the diagnosis is definite, and everything that's been happening to you lately can be explained by this." A dead silence fell over the office. It was frightening, even more so than any accusation. It destroyed everything: lies, jealousy, hatred. All the disgusting drama of the last few days suddenly seemed like nothing more than the tragic consequence of a disintegrating mind. Simon sat down on a chair next to his mother, his face paler than snow. Looking at her for the first time in many years, he saw not an authoritative and distant woman, but a person who was frightened and sick. Beatrice slowly raised her hand and placed it on her temple, as if searching for an invisible enemy that had taken root in her thoughts. At that moment, she felt like the most pitiful and unhappy creature in this huge, empty house. The words early-stage dementia hung in the office like an ominous premonition, heavy and inevitable, like harbingers of inevitable doom. They seemed to suck the air out of the room, filling the silence with a ringing, unbearable echo. Beatrice sat motionless, her gaze fixed on the medical report lying on the table, but the letters in front of her seemed to dissolve. Her carefully constructed world, built on status, control, and arrogance, had collapsed, revealing the emptiness and horror that now seemed inevitable. The first to break the frozen silence was a quiet, stifled sob. It escaped her lips as if against her will, convulsive and unsteady. She covered her mouth with her hands, trying to hold it back, but more sobs followed. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Instead of the imperious mistress of the house, there was a broken, terrified woman who had encountered an enemy that could not be defeated, subjugated, or banished. Simon, coming to his senses, involuntarily stepped forward and gently placed his hand on his mother's shoulder. She flinched, but did not push him away. For the first time in many years, a thin thread of understanding emerged between them, born of a shared tragedy. Walter watched the scene, his face contorted with immeasurable bitterness. All his strength, all the anger he had been harboring, faded away, leaving only a dull, unbearable pain. "I've noticed something was wrong for a long time," he began quietly, addressing Simon more than his wife. "But I dismissed it as stress, as your personality. I didn't want to believe it could be something serious. I hired a detective not only to find the brooch, but also to help me document and confirm my fears, to describe the strangeness of your behavior, so that the experts would have the full picture." He sighed heavily, massaging his face with his palms. "It doesn't change anything," Beatrice growled through her tears, her voice barely audible, as if torn apart. "I'm sick. So what now? Are you just going to leave me alone, waiting for me to turn into a helpless shadow? Will you feel sorry for my fate? I don't need your pity." Her attempt to stand up was unsuccessful. Her legs gave way, and with a heavy sigh she settled back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. "No one is going to hold you back," Walter said confidently. "But we can no longer ignore the situation. You need help, Beatrice. Specialists can offer you treatment, clinics and programs that will help slow the progression of the disease and keep your mind clear for as long as possible. We will deal with this together, as a family." He emphasized the last words, turning to Simon, who nodded silently. In that moment, Walter made his decision without hesitation. His gaze fell on the folder on the table, on his wife, whose tears were still flowing, on his son, who seemed to have grown up in one evening, and he realized what a terrible mistake he had made just a few minutes ago.
"I have to fix this," he whispered, and without another word he left the office.
Going downstairs, he took his phone out of his pocket and called his assistant. "Mark, I urgently need the contact details for Isabella, our former maid. Yes, that's the one. Please send them to me as soon as possible." A minute later, a message arrived on his phone with an address in a modest neighborhood on the other side of town. Walter did not use the services of a driver, but took the car keys himself and left the house. The drive through the evening city became a kind of catharsis for him. He replayed the scene of the dismissal in his mind over and over again, his emotionless professional behavior, and felt the heat of shame flush his cheeks. He tried to make up for the injustice he had caused by buying forgiveness for the harm his family had done to an innocent person. His actions were dictated by a calculation more typical of a businessman than a decent person. Isabella's flat, tiny and cozy, was on the third floor of an old brick building. Walter, feeling out of place in his expensive suit, climbed the worn steps and stopped in front of the shabby door. He took a deep breath and knocked. The door swung open, and Isabella, seeing him on the threshold, froze in surprise. Behind her, in a modest but immaculately clean room, sat her mother, a thin woman with a sickly appearance, wrapped up in an armchair by the window, Mr. Walter? Isabella asked quietly. What are you doing here? May I come in for a moment? He asked politely. I have something to tell you. Stepping back quietly, she let him in. He entered, and the stark contrast between this modest dwelling and his luxurious mansion hurt him to the core.
Isabella, I came back to apologize again, he began, unable to find the right words for the main point. But this time I'm not apologizing for my wife, but for myself. My behavior today was unacceptable. I was wrong.
He paused, thinking about his choice of words.
I want you to understand this. My wife, Beatrice, is very ill, he said quietly. Her actions, her aggression and suspicion are all the result of a terrible disease that is slowly destroying her psyche. I'm not saying this to absolve her of responsibility, but only so that you understand the real reasons.
Isabella listened to him, and her face reflected a gradually changing range of emotions. Anger and resentment gave way to warm waves of sympathy. That's why I fired you. I thought I was saving you from danger, protecting you from future threats, Walter continued. I believed that a large monetary compensation was a worthy solution, but I was wrong. Money cannot replace justice. It is only an attempt to atone for guilt, and you deserve more than just monetary compensation. You deserve to have back the future that was taken from you. His gaze was serious and direct, looking her straight in the eye. Isabella, I am indebted to you. You saved my company from huge losses, demonstrating not only deep knowledge but also exceptional integrity in a difficult situation where many in your position would have acted only in their own interests. I will certainly repay this debt. He paused, gathering his thoughts before announcing his main, stunning decision, which would be discussed for a long time to come. I am prepared to pay for your university education for all 4 years until you receive your degree. In addition, I would like to offer you an internship in the international department of my company. You will work with our lawyers, assisting with translations and document analysis. You will have a flexible schedule so that your studies are not affected, and a decent salary. Remember, Isabella, I'm not just doing charity work. I'm investing in you. After all, such talented and decent people are an invaluable resource that cannot be replaced by anything else. The small room was silent, interrupted only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Isabella's mother sat in an armchair, her hands clenched into fists, her eyes moist with tears. Isabella stood silently, staring at Walter as if trying to make sure she had heard him correctly. She wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, tears rolled down her cheeks, but they were no longer tears of despair and humiliation, but tears of hope, relief, and deep gratitude. She took a determined step forward and, despite the tremor in her voice, uttered just one word.
Agreed.
The following weeks flew by in a rapid stream of events that forever changed the lives of everyone involved in this drama. For Isabella, a new chapter began, filled with both exciting hopes and frightening uncertainty. Walter kept his promise to the end, and 3 days later Isabella was sitting in the admissions office of her former university, signing the documents for her return, with all the financial aspects settled with a single phone call from his assistant. Returning to the world of lectures, seminars, and libraries felt like waking up from a long, painful sleep. She enthusiastically immersed herself in her studies, eagerly absorbing knowledge that until recently had seemed lost to her forever. Her first day as an intern at Sterling Corporation was truly exciting. In the huge skyscraper, gleaming with glass and steel, she felt tiny and out of place in her modest but neat dress. Nevertheless, she was greeted not with disdain, but with professional courtesy. Mr. Davis, the head of the legal department, a stern, middle-aged man, personally gave her a tour of the office, introduced her to the team, and described her responsibilities in detail. She was given a compact but personalized desk with a computer and access to all the necessary databases. The task turned out to be challenging but exciting. She was involved in the initial review of foreign contracts, compiled reports on the legal acts of other countries, and assisted senior lawyers in translating documentation. Her insight, attention to detail, and impeccable command of the language quickly earned her the respect of her colleagues. Unaware of her past, They saw her only as a capable and hard-working intern, which was the most valuable thing for Isabella. Meanwhile, life in the luxurious mansion on the hill took on a completely different tone. After the shocking news, the house, which had previously served as a showcase for wealth, fell silent and became a fortress where the family came to terms with a new, terrifying reality. Thanks to his connections and opportunities, Walter found the most prestigious, specialized clinic in the country for Beatrice. The first few weeks were the most difficult. Beatrice did not accept her diagnosis, caused scandals, and blamed her husband for wanting to get rid of her. However, in rare moments of clarity, she was overcome by a chilling fear. At such times, she forgot the names of her relatives, could not remember what day it was, and her desperate gaze caused Walter and Simon physical pain. During this period, Simon finally came of age. He stepped out of his role as a quiet, detached observer and became his mother's main support. He spent hours with her, reading aloud her favorite books, which she could no longer read herself, showing her old family photos and patiently reminding her of names and related events. Simon learned to understand and anticipate her mood swings, to calm her during panic attacks, and simply to be there when she was having a hard time. Their shared misfortune brought him and his father incredibly close. In the evenings, they spent a lot of time in the study, talking not about business, but about Beatrice's health, new treatments, and how to build their future. The years of estrangement that had separated them came crashing down. Walter saw in his son not an indifferent heir, but a courageous, compassionate man he could rely on. Simon, in turn, saw in his father not only an influential businessman, but also a tired, loving spouse who was fighting desperately for his wife. 2 years flew by. The bright autumn sun streamed through the windows of the spacious conference room on the top floor of Sterling Corporation, illuminating the negotiating table, where intense work was in full swing. A team of lawyers was preparing to conclude an important international deal. At the center of the discussions, confidently and calmly answering questions from more experienced colleagues, sat Isabella. Her former appearance as a frightened maid was now just a memory. Before them stood an elegant young woman in a strict business suit, one of the firm's most talented junior lawyer linguists. Successfully combining her final year of university studies with work, she had earned Walter's promise of a permanent contract and a successful career after graduation. Thanks to her efforts, she was able to provide her mother with quality treatment at a private clinic and no longer worried about her health. Her life had undergone radical changes, and this metamorphosis was the result not only of Walter's benevolence, but also of her own persistence, talent, and unwavering will. A new, albeit sad, balance was established in the mansion. Beatrice's illness progressed, but thanks to the diligent efforts of the doctors and the constant care of her relatives, its course was significantly slowed down. Beatrice lived in her own world, created from fragments of memories and childhood dreams. Arrogance and malice gave way to a quiet, sometimes confused calm. She rarely recognized Walter, but always greeted Simon with a smile, affectionately calling him her good boy. Simon, fulfilling his promise, spent almost all his free time with her. The shocking event he had experienced was a turning point in his life. He left the economics department and enrolled in medical school to devote himself to the study of neurological disorders. One Saturday, Simon was walking with his mother in the garden as usual. Beatrice was studying the flowers with childlike joy until her attention was drawn to a car pulling up to the house. Isabella got out, having come on Walter's behalf to pick up some urgent documents. Their eyes met. Isabella smiled warmly at Simon, and he responded with the same sincere and grateful smile. There was no embarrassment or painful memories in their eyes, only the quiet, sincere respect of two destinies forever crossed by one ugly scene that had played out on this very lawn. "What a beautiful girl!" Beatrice suddenly whispered in a soft, ringing voice, fixing her gaze on Isabella. "She reminds me of a good fairy." Simon looked at his mother, then at Isabella, who, upon hearing this, seemed to freeze. In this momentary flash of insight, in this unexpected phrase uttered by the sick woman, their whole story found its logical conclusion. Everything came together in a single, complete circle. The humiliated servant had, in essence, become a kind of fairy to this family, whose appearance, albeit through suffering and deprivation, had destroyed the false shell that had covered their world and forced everyone to find their true human form. Isabella nodded politely, took the folder from the assistant, and set off to meet her bright destiny, leaving behind the walls that had served as both a shelter and a starting point for a new, bright life.